On the diet side, there's been some research studies supporting caloric restriction and intermittent fasting. So these are dietary interventions introducing mild metabolic stress. So your body thinks that you might be entering a starvation period or a period of stress. And so that activates autophagy, a cellular cleanup process. So I've spoken about this in depth in other episodes, but essentially autophagy is when you clean up the cells, you're recycling the parts that you can reuse and throwing away the bad stuff, and then you therefore can improve metabolic efficiency. Welcome to the Longevity Show. I'm your host, Dr. Hillary Lynn. If you're joining me for the first time, I'm really delighted to have you here. I am a practicing physician with a background in neuroscience, oncology, and primary care, now focused on longevity medicine. I completed my training at Stanford and Columbia, and over the years, I've been actively involved in the global health tech and startup community, serving as a board member of institutions such as the Stanford Alumni Startups New York and advising organizations such as Cornell's Bio Venture Lab. I co-founded Curio, a venture-backed health tech startup focused on mental health, and my mission now is to drive medical evidence and transparency to empower people to live longer, healthier, and more fulfilled lives. So on the Longevity Show, we explore the science and strategies behind living longer and healthier lives. We air every weekday on Noom Vibe Live, where you're listening to me today. And my time here is Monday through Fridays at noon or noon o'clock, so 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. EST. We're also available on YouTube, so I'll be recording this for people who want to watch this in all its visual glory. Later, you can jump on to my YouTube channel, which is at Hillary Lynn MD. Today, we're going to dive into a fascinating and somewhat counterintuitive concept in biology called hormesis. So we're going to dive into the molecular mechanisms, discuss recent research findings, and explore practical applications that can enhance your health span and lifespan. So let's get started. What is hormesis, other than being a cool Greek word? Hormesis is a biological phenomenon characterized by a biphasic dose response to an environmental agent. In simpler terms, it means that low doses of a potentially harmful stressor can trigger a beneficial adaptive response in our bodies, while high doses are detrimental. The concept challenges the traditional view that exposure to stressors is purely harmful. Instead, hormesis suggests that small amounts of stress can actually make us stronger. So, what doesn't kill you truly can make you stronger, just as Kelly Clarkson said. To visualize this, let's think about how vaccines work. A tiny, harmless dose of a pathogen is introduced to our bodies, and it prompts our immune system to build defenses without causing disease. Similarly, hormesis involves low-level stress that activates our body's adaptive mechanisms, enhancing resilience. The mechanism of hormesis involves the activation of cellular stress response pathways that improve the organism, that's us, ability to cope with stress. So you're probably wondering what all these words I'm saying mean, and really what I'm just trying to say is that it's not this philosophical concept. It's not like our body just understands, okay, if we get a little bit of something harmful, we're going to get stronger. The body is made up of a lot of cells that don't have brains. We actually have molecular reasons or molecular mechanisms that result in this hormesis effect. So some of these key molecular mechanisms include the activation of transcription factors, such as nuclear factor erythroid 2 related factor 2, NRF2, NRF2. When activated, NRF2 moves into the nucleus of the cell. That's the quote unquote brain of the cell, or the center, the core of the cell that contains the DNA and all the data. And then it binds to antioxidant response elements in the DNA, leading to the production of antioxidant proteins, such as glutathione. A 2020 study published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences by Rosnarova and colleagues highlights how environmental stressors can activate the adaptive responses through changes in DNA methylation and microRNA expression. A lot of technical terms here, but essentially DNA methylation is a concept you will hear over and again on this podcast because it's the way that we can alter the expression of DNA. So to go over this concept briefly, remember that DNA is the same in every single one of our cells. We inherit it from our parents at birth or at conception, and our DNA does not change unless we get really good at gene therapy and we can edit our DNA. So something we can do is cause the expression of DNA to change. So that is what DNA methylation is. It's adding these methyl groups to DNA so that when it's read by your cellular products, so the organelles and all the enzymes, the proteins, and all the other substances in a cell, they respond to changes in your DNA. And so the message is read differently, so to speak. So it's kind of like having a performance based on a script. So there might be the original script, which will never change. However, there can be adaptations, there can be a director's edits, things like that, which can result in a different interpretation and different performance. So that's what's happening when we methylate or we change DNA's expression. MicroRNA expression is a similar concept, so I'm not going to dive too deeply into that, but needless to say, there's just ways that environmental events or stressors in this case, because we're talking about hormesis or helpful stress, can actually activate these adaptive responses through changes in DNA methylation and microRNA expression. So really important concept here. These epigenetic modifications result in increased production of cytoprotective proteins, including growth factors, which are exactly like they sound. These are factors that tell different things to grow, so cells often, to grow more. And also it can increase production of phase 2 detoxifying enzymes and protein chaperones. These are all highly technical terms, I recognize, but needless to say, these are all very important parts of the body or at the micro level, these proteins that help change how your cells are expressing. So that's the very, very nitty gritty mechanism. And we're about to dive a little bit deeper, so bear with me. So diving into the molecular underpinnings a bit more. So activation of the nerve pathway is crucial for cellular defense mechanisms, and under normal conditions, NRF2 is inactive in the cytoplasm. So when a cell experiences mild stress, NRF2 is released and translocates, so it moves to the nucleus. There it binds to the antioxidant response elements, ARE, in the DNA and promote the expression of genes involved in antioxidant defense, detoxification, and cell survival. So I'm just repeating what we said in a slightly different way, but essentially when you've got a mild stressful event, it triggers this pathway which goes all the way into the DNA and promotes changes expression, promotes the expression of certain genes that result in positive effects such as antioxidation, detoxification, and cell survival. So those are good effects. Calabrese and Cozumbo, so researchers in a 2021 article, elaborate how low dose exposure to certain stressors can activate the NRF2 pathway. So they emphasize that the hormetic dose response is characterized by stimulation at low doses and inhibition at high doses, which is a hallmark of hormesis. So to state that in a different way, hormesis occurs or it's stimulated when there's a low dose of a stressor, a low dose of a toxin or a poison, something that is challenging. However, at a high dose, it is not stimulated. So we can all kind of intuitively feel that out. If, for example, you have a toxin, let's just use alcohol because alcohol is a really interesting one. You have really, really low doses, then your body might ramp up its ability to tolerate alcohol, and that's kind of how we experience it. However, at very high doses, you actually poison the human who's taking in all that alcohol. So what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but at a certain dose, it will kill you. So the dose is the poison is another way that people remark upon it. So that difference between a low dose effect and non-existence of like the positive effects at a high dose, this is a hallmark of hormesis. So let's talk about the epigenetic modifications. So recall that I was talking about the changes such as DNA methylation, and also there's something called histone modification. Histones are, just for people who know this concept quite well, they're the spools around which the thread of DNA spool around. These are also involved in hormesis. So modifications can alter gene expression without changing the underlying DNA sequence. Remember, your DNA does not change unless we get really good at gene editing. It's not quite prime time for that yet, but for now, just assume that we are not editing the DNA in any way. This allows cells to respond dynamically to environmental cues. So what occurs in your environment will affect the way that your DNA is being expressed without actually changing the code itself. So some of these environmental stressors can contribute to adaptive responses, and this epigenetic flexibility enhances cellular resistance or resilience and the ability to cope with stress. Activation of stress response pathways leads to increased production of cytoprotective proteins. So cytoprotective proteins are really important. Cyto refers to the cell, protective, protect, and then proteins, obviously, they're elements in our body. So one example are the antioxidant enzymes. So these are called glutathione S-transferase and superoxide dismutase, among others, but these are some of the more common ones. They neutralize reactive oxygen species, ROS, and reduce oxidative stress. So when you hear about eating your quote unquote superfoods and getting your antioxidants, so what we're talking about are substances such as the glutathione S-transferase and superoxide dismutase, which will tackle the oxidation. Oxidation is exactly what it sounds like. So if you've ever heard of iron rusting or oxidizing, that can happen in the body as well. And you need to have antioxidant processes or enzymes to reverse that. Luckily, we have processes because we're living bodies. We can reverse oxidative damage. Unlike iron, it's not going to magically and spontaneously reverse its oxidative damage, unfortunately. So one of the cytoprotective or the positive cell protecting pathways proteins that are impacted by hormesis are the antioxidant enzymes. So that's first. And then we also have the heat shock proteins. Heat shock proteins function as molecular chaperones. So they aid the proper folding of proteins and prevent aggregation. So essentially, without having to know all the details about that, we basically need heat shock proteins to make sure that proteins are getting folded or put in the right shape. It's kind of like origami. You can imagine it. It's actually really cool how it happens in your cells, because the proteins just come together based on its components sort of getting attracted to one another based on whether there's positive or negative charges. And heat shock proteins are there to make sure that this actually happens, because you can kind of imagine, like, if you have origami or a Lego sort of toy, for example, and it's just floating around in the water and it's like folding up in some random way. Sometimes, and hopefully it will, fold up in the right way where all of the attractive areas, like the magnets, are attracting each other in the right place. But heat shock proteins are there to make sure that the proper folding actually does occur and prevent aggregation of them in an improper way, so that it's not functional in essence. Finally, another group of cytoprotective proteins are the phase 2 detoxifying enzymes. So these are proteins involved in the conjugation and elimination of toxins from the body. Conjugation just means basically combining all of the different toxins to the enzymes and everything else, and then getting rid of the toxin. So this is a much bigger, more complicated process, but this group of enzymes or proteins are involved in this process. So to quickly recap, the cytoprotective proteins that are impacted in hormesis are antioxidant type proteins, which are helping reverse oxidative stress, the rusting of our body. And then we've got the heat shock proteins, which helps to fold things properly, makes the origami happen in the right way for all of our proteins, so in our building of the body. And then we've got the detoxifying proteins, the phase 2 detoxifying enzymes, which help with detoxing the body, getting rid of toxins that we inevitably accumulate every single day in our body. So let's talk about the broader benefits of hormesis. So hormesis has the broad benefits of enhancing cellular repair, improving metabolic efficiency, and increasing resistance to stressors. So this is where hopefully this conversation or discussion is going to go into much more practical reality for most of our listeners. So stay tuned. I know we've gone through a lot of technical details thus far. Exercise-induced hormesis. Physical exercise is a prime example of hormesis in action. When we exercise, our muscles experience mild stress due to increased metabolic activity and the production of reactive oxygen species. So there is, quote unquote, a little bad stuff happening in the cellular level when you're exercising, but it's good because it's that low level amount of stress which is causing hormesis. This low-level stress stimulates adaptive responses that enhance antioxidant defenses and improve mitochondrial function. In a 2016 study in Free Radical Biology and Medicine by a group of researchers showed that regular exercise induces hormetic responses in skeletal muscle. So this was proven in not only this study, but it's been shown over and again. And they showed that exercise enhances the expression of endogenous, that just means our own, endogenous, our body-made antioxidants, and promotes mitochondrial biogenesis. So we're improving our mitochondrial health. And that in turn leads to improved muscle health and function. Now let's talk about dietary phytochemicals, and neuroprotection. So dietary phytochemicals, we've talked about phytochemicals in the past, bioactive compounds found in plants. So they can induce hormetic responses that promote neuroprotection and neuroplasticity. Neuro meaning the brain and the related neural cells, and protection, obviously we're protecting the brain. Neuroplasticity means the rewiring of, or the learning, the change, the evolution of the brain connections. So, for example, resveratrol in grapes and curcumin in turmeric can activate adaptive stress responses in neurons. In a recent paper in Cell Metabolism, the researchers Matson and Leek discussed the hormesis principle of neuroplasticity and neuroprotection. Researchers explained how low doses of phytochemicals activate cellular stress response pathways, enhancing brain health and potentially reducing the risk of neurodegenerative diseases. As we age, our bodies experience a decline in homeodynamic space. So this is moving on to how hormesis affects our aging. So as we age, our capacity to maintain internal stability amidst our external stressors that we're impacted by all the time, I'm sure everyone can just picture it. We're like a house in the wind as we're going through life, and our shingles are falling off, our walls are getting dented and throughout all the time. But as living beings, we can counteract this, and hormesis can help us counteract this decline by enhancing our body's own adaptive responses. So a 2008 article in Aging Research Reviews did explore how hormesis can be applied to aging interventions. The researcher Ratan posits that mild periodic stressors can stimulate maintenance and repair pathways, promoting healthy aging and potentially extending lifespan. In another more recent study in Aging Research Reviews, there's further elaboration on how hormesis defines the limits of lifespan. So that's really interesting because I don't think anybody can agree on the reason for why humans live to a certain amount of time and then we seemingly inevitably die. So this theory goes into how hormetic interventions can modulate the aging process, enhancing resilience and delaying the onset of age-related diseases. However, it also explains that at some point we lose the fight in essence. And so there's always a limit, so far anyways, in all practical experiences of human life thus far. Every human ever known to live has been known to die. So what are some things you can do? What are some interventions you can take for healthy aging? Just knowing all of this about hormesis. So on the diet side, there's been some research studies supporting caloric restriction and intermittent fasting. So these are dietary interventions introducing mild metabolic stress. So your body thinks that you might be entering a starvation period or a period of stress. And so that activates autophagy, a cellular cleanup process. So I've spoken about this in depth in other episodes, but essentially autophagy is when you clean up the cells, you're recycling the parts that you can reuse and throwing away the bad stuff, and then you therefore can improve metabolic efficiency. So many studies have shown that caloric restriction can extend lifespan in various organisms. However, it's really hard to do in humans. So it's a lot trickier because humans have very nuanced, complicated lives, and caloric restriction would limit our life experience too much, such that not many people can stand the idea of caloric restriction for the long term and living out the rest of their days. So we also know that in animal models, as soon as you stop the caloric restriction, and we're talking severe caloric restriction, not just getting down to 75% of your daily calories, but like going down much, much farther. So some people even suggest you need to get down to around 1,000 calories a day. So that's pretty limited for most people. It's just not tolerable in most applicable cases. And so some people have tried intermittent fasting to promote autophagy. Again, the research here is supportive. However, we don't have enough research to broadly recommend that everybody just go ahead and intermittently fast. It's something that I think is helpful for a lot of reasons. It can help your sleep, for example, to stop eating a little bit earlier. It's also great to give your gut a bit of a rest. It's good for your regularity of your bowel movements. It's good for your circadian rhythm. You get deep rest, and then therefore in the morning, you're waking up more rested, well, and with greater clarity and mental health. So there's a lot of reasons to try intermittent fasting, in addition to the potential benefits of autophagy, the hormesis leading to autophagy. But I just want to make it clear that we don't have all the answers, and it's not 100% clear that it is a longevity cure or a secret to longevity, for example. So another area that might not be immediately obvious, but once you hear it, it's going to sound like a duh thing, is cognitive stimulation. So engaging in challenging mental activities acts as a hormetic stressor for the brain. It promotes neuroplasticity and cognitive resilience. So that might seem obvious because obviously if you are doing a lot of challenging puzzles or interacting with the world, your brain is going to get smarter. It's going to be more capable of rising to the challenge. However, this concept of hormesis helps explain it at a molecular level. There's actually something going on that makes this occur, and perhaps also explains why severe challenges can be harmful in essence. So this is a little bit less clear because we don't know what is considered a dose in terms of stimulation, but you can sort of suppose, like, if you have a particularly traumatic experience, that might be a overly toxic dose rather than a helpful, challenging, hormetic dose to the brain. So that can stifle growth and actually hurt the brain and hurt cognition rather than help it. In 2018, a study by Kim and colleagues showed how evolutionarily adapted hormesis-inducing stressors like intermittent fasting can mitigate the harmful effects of chronic exposure to low-dose chemical mixtures, just as one example for how the research has supported this in the past. Okay, next, let's explore how we can apply the concept of hormesis in our daily lives to enhance health and longevity. So, one, physical exercise is key. So we talk about exercise all the time here, and this is yet another reason to introduce a physical exercise into your routine. By incorporating regular physical activity, you get that light hormetic dose. Aerobic exercises and strength or resistance training can both serve as hormetic stressors, so positive hormetic stressors. High intensity interval training HIIT exercises are short bursts of intense activity followed by rest periods. This is actually theorized to be so helpful because it maximizes the hormetic benefits. If you zoom out and think about this a little bit, you recognize that HIIT exercises, by increasing the intensity, you're challenging, but then you're giving yourself a break so you're not hurting yourself by staying at a super high intensity for too long. And then you're going back up and then going down and going back up and going back down. So that sort of repeated challenge gives you a greater dose or frequency of the low dose hormesis, but without stressing your body too much that you are hurting your body in essence. So that is the theory as to why HIIT exercises seem to be so helpful for so many things related to health and longevity. Strength training, similarly, is also helpful because when you are lifting a slightly challenging weight, that can help you build muscle mass. Of course, if you lift something that's way too heavy, if you lift something that's way too heavy, you're going to hurt yourself. So definitely you have to pick the right weight, not injure yourself, because that's going to bring you back quite a number of days in terms of your exercise goals, and it will be too much of a dose for hormesis to occur. When you strength train, interestingly, you promote your metabolic health. So I know a lot of people know that, like, by running or doing the aerobic exercises, that seems very intuitive, that should help your metabolic health. Well, strength training also does help with your metabolic health, as it's shown in a lot of research studies. We spoke a bit about dietary interventions. So just to reiterate, we've got the intermittent fasting. So fasting periods, for example, of 12 hours, or you can increase it to as long as some people do 18 hours. Some people do longer, but I typically, for my patient population, I recommend going only up to 18 hours with any regularity, because any more than that, and you're starting to get into really great amounts of stress. The dose of stress is a bit high to do regularly. So that can activate autophagy and improve insulin sensitivity. Again, we don't exactly know how to measure that autophagy is happening. So it's very possible that intermittent fasting isn't activating quite as much autophagy as we'd want, but at the very least, it's giving your body a little bit of a break. And if you fast just a little bit longer than your body is super comfortable with, then that light amount of challenge or hormesis is probably right. Caloric restriction, same thing. You want to be a little bit under what your body would prefer to, if you're going to stick to the caloric restriction diet for autophagy. But again, this is a very challenging thing to do long term, and so it isn't practical for most people. But in mouse and other animal studies, it has been associated with greater lifespan extension. It's one of the very first types of research that was done in the field of longevity. It actually seems to have given birth to the entire field. So just an interesting fact and piece of knowledge there. Number 3, we talked about phytochemicals. So phytochemicals are plant chemicals. They come from a variety of fruits, vegetables, herbs, and spices. They're rich with these bioactive compounds in your diet. So some examples that we love are berries, which are rich in anthocyanins. So especially blueberries, they have the blue in them. They're rich in this product. We also have cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, which have sulforaphane. And then we've got green tea rich in catechins, and turmeric, which contains curcumin. So these are all great examples. You've heard of all of these foods before, and now you know the reason why it's helpful. It's actually because the phytochemicals produce the hormetic effect. Then we've got thermal stress. So this is really interesting because I don't think it's obvious to many people. But for example, sauna therapy, heat exposure can induce heat shock proteins. Interestingly, it's named heat shock proteins because the heat exposure can induce the proteins to have the changes, and it promotes the cellular repair mechanisms that we spoke about, the refolding or the folding of proteins to their proper shape, and the heat shock proteins can help with that. We've also got on the other side cold exposure. So very cold showers or cold plunges, if you've been to a bathhouse, can activate cold shock proteins and improve metabolic function. Then, of course, we talked about cognitive challenges. So learning new skills, picking up a new language or instrument stimulates the brain and promotes neuroplasticity. We've also got puzzles and brain games. So regular mental exercises can enhance your cognitive resilience and may reduce the risk of cognitive decline. However, I'm going to say out here that we're not really sure whether specific puzzles are going to help your overall brain health. I usually recommend that people just go ahead and do activities that are, prevalent in life, let's just say. So if you are working, people who work for longer tend to have sharper brains. And we see that anecdotally for people who retire, oftentimes, especially if you're no longer living a very active life, then your brain actually does get a little bit less sharp. So it is important to stay active, even if you're retiring, perhaps take on volunteering or just interact with other people, especially people who challenge you in terms of, introducing you new knowledge or news in general, and you have debates or discussions and challenges to your ideas and opinions. So this all can help with your brain health, your continued brain health. The field of hormesis is rapidly evolving, and there's new research all the time shedding light on its potential applications. So scientists are exploring drugs, for example, that mimic hormetic stress responses without the need for actual stress exposure. We all wish that we could just get away without having the challenges to our lives, like exercise, for example. But spoiler alert, we haven't actually found anything quite yet. So go ahead and exercise, because none of these drugs that I'm going to be talking about are nearly as effective as getting the proper amount of exercise and all the other things that I spoke about. So first, Metformin is an anti-diabetic drug that many people have heard of. It's shown potential in mimicking some of the effects of caloric restriction. That being said, there's a lot of research out there showing that metformin doesn't have this pro longevity effect that we all hoped for. It is still really helpful. I do encourage people who would benefit from it to take it because it has other benefits. For example, helping you regulate your sugar levels in your body. So especially if you are pre-diabetic or full-on diabetic, metformin can be a really helpful drug for you. And it does help with hormesis. So it's a pharmacologic hormesis at play. Also, there's rapamycin, which is an mTOR inhibitor associated with lifespan extension in animal models. This is a really interesting drug, and I'll be talking about it in depth in a future episode because rapamycin is just so fascinating. It's the one drug that's come out to support longevity in so many animal models. It hasn't been super studied in human populations yet because longevity is tough to study in humans, quite frankly, but there are early studies out there in humans showing some benefits. For example, in ovarian preservation, there was a pilot study that was completed, and the full study is actually still ongoing at Columbia, showing suggestive effects that rapamycin can help prolong ovarian sustainability or maintain ovarian sustainability and health, even in women who have premature ovarian insufficiency. So this is really interesting research. I'm keeping an eye on it, very hopeful for the future. And also there's the concept of personalized hormesis. So advancements in genomics and biomarker analysis allow for individualized hormetic interventions based on genetic profiles and metabolic states. Tailoring interventions can maximize benefits while minimizing your risks. Environmental hormesis, too, can be really interesting. So I've spoken about this in the past, but this is a fascinating topic to me. There's only really ever been one study that I'm aware of that really studied radiation in terms of environmental hormesis, but a building or a complex of buildings in Taiwan was found to have radiation due to the building materials, and a pretty big study of 10,000 plus of its tenants showed that actually instead of having higher rates of cancer, as you might expect with radiation exposure over a long period of time, the population seemed to have a lower rate of cancer incidence. And even the folks who had cancer in the population, it seemed that their cancers were related to other reasons. So it was just such an interesting example. It's not something that we can easily ethically study. We're not going to ever test that again, likely, but it's just an interesting observational study that came out of this finding that this building complex in Taiwan seemed to have this low dose amount of radiation over a long period of time that seemed to perhaps protect its tenants from cancer exposure. But the dose truly is the poison, and we don't know what dose is the poison for radiation. So I highly discourage people from trying this out at home. Radiation is generally bad enough that you don't want to mess around. So like I've been talking about, Hormesis does offer very promising health benefits, but it's really important to consider the risks and ethical implications. The dose-response relationship is really important. So remember, a low dose of a toxin can be really helpful for inducing hormesis, but a high dose is not going to induce it. And so knowing the dose is really, really important. If you exceed the optimal dose, you can actually get adverse effect. You can hurt the body or even kill the body. So you want to be really careful. Individual tolerance levels will vary, so that just emphasizes our need for personalized approaches. So as a very simple example, exercise. What works for a bodybuilder, lifting hundreds of pounds and a deadlift is not going to work for someone like me. I'm a relative weaker person in the gym, and my degree of hormesis lies in a lighter weight, let's just say. Overtraining on that example, such as excessive exercise without adequate recovery, can lead to injuries and weakened immunity. So if you've ever heard of the importance of recovery, this is what we're talking about. You don't want to keep training and exercising and challenging your body, because that actually goes against health for your body. It can lead to actual injury, and it definitely doesn't lead to the positive effects. For the diet side, we talked about caloric restriction. We want to make sure that people aren't nutritionally deficient. So folks who have tried fasting before and they have negative outcomes, for example, they feel weaker or more tired, or their hair starts to fall out, that often is not necessarily due to the caloric restriction itself, because oftentimes if you are doing this intentionally, you're not restricting calories so much that you don't have enough calories to get on in the day. It's because a lot of people accidentally miss out on certain nutrients that they need as a process of trying to restrict their calories. So that's just an important point, and I bring that up a lot. There's a lot of talk out there too about different people and whether you should fast or shouldn't fast, or the degree of fasting. And I believe that the health influencers out there are oversimplifying things when they say, like, oh, you should or shouldn't fast during your period, or before your period, or after your period, or if you are XYZ, this and that, because it really is highly individualized, to the point that you need to understand your own body at a certain point in time. You need to understand if you have built up the resilience for a particular level of challenge or a particular level of fasting. And you need to hear out, or you need to be aware of your body's own responses. So there's not a clear-cut answer for people who are approaching the caloric restriction and the fasting sort of challenges, but it's just important to work with a health professional and understand your own body, feel out your body, and be aware of what feels like too much of a stressor for your body. Thermal stress risks, I probably don't need to mention this, but extreme temperatures are very dangerous. And even without to scalding levels or burning levels or freezing levels, even getting towards that can be dangerous for people with underlying health conditions. If you have a heart condition, definitely you want to be careful with extreme temperatures. And there's certain other conditions that you want to be aware of as well. And then I want to talk briefly too about the pharmacologic agents. So this is a field of study that is pretty early. And so pharmacologic agents for hormesis is still super early. We don't really have the answer. So if you're thinking about starting something like metformin or rapamycin or something else that might assist with hormetic effects, just work with somebody who knows what they're talking about, a doctor and scientist who understands the science and can help guide you through the risk benefit balance and figuring out if this is right for you. Oftentimes, you're going to be using these medications in an off-label status, which means that there's not formal FDA approved guidance for how to do this. So you need to really rely on experts who have the experience to do this. I'm not saying that they don't exist. It's just important to recognize that it's a pretty nuanced field. In public health, hormesis also has a role in public health. So mitigating environmental toxins is really important. So like I mentioned, low levels of environmental stressors might enhance population resistance. However, too high, of course, you're going to have problems. You're going to have outcomes such as cancer in the case of radiation, but you could also have the impacts of, even noise pollution. It's really interesting. We're only now really recognizing that even something like noise can be really impactful. There's some theories about it impacting our brain's function, actually, whether things like ADHD or neuroatypical sort of presentation in children and going into adulthood might be impacted by noise pollution to a great deal. And we're talking about like household noise pollution too, not just like outside noise pollution, like having a TV on all the time or things like that. It's not natural to the human body. And there's some theories that are coming out and being proven out in certain studies that this may actually be harmful in some cases. So there's a lot of examples of environmental toxins or challenges to the body that are less than helpful. I would say for the average listener out there, it's just important to know that there's a certain dose that's helpful and a certain dose that's harmful. So I recommend that people get knowledgeable about public health guidelines and recommendations so that, hopefully we can integrate some of this hormesis into, especially around pollution and how it affects us. Air pollution, my goodness, that is a really important topic as well. And promoting lifestyle interventions that harness the hormetic benefits, such as community exercise programs and educational initiatives, that's also quite important. For me, as a longevity physician, I think about hormesis quite a bit. And my patients, I recommend for everybody to do all the things that we mentioned, the exercise, the phytochemicals, and the cognitive challenges in a positive way. And I also talk a lot about rapamycin and similar pharmacologics that might be helpful. But it is a topic that is growing still. We don't fully understand how to control this hormetic dose. At the end of the day, I think, again, it's really important to understand your own body and to get a bit of a challenge without hurting yourself. So if you remember nothing else from today's episode, I hope that you will go out and exercise a bit and eat your fruits and vegetables. These are some really, really simple, easy ways that you can introduce hormesis. And remember that while every human is quite lazy, we would all love to live comfortable, relaxed lives. It's important to have a healthy degree of challenge so that we can have the benefits of hormesis. So some people have asked me questions such as, can hormesis help in preventing chronic disease? Yes, hormesis absolutely can enhance the body's adaptive responses, and it can produce such benefits that we can reduce risks of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and even neurodegenerative disorders. So by strengthening cellular defense mechanisms and improving metabolic functions, hormesis contributes to overall physiologic health. So there's this question, how do I start incorporating hormesis safely? Begin gradually, start low and go slow. This is a really important thing to do when you are incorporating hormesis for the first time. So you want to listen to your body. You want to introduce the hormetic practice a little bit at a time, such as incorporating 2 days of high intensity exercise per week, or maybe extending your overnight fasting window by just an hour. So monitor how you feel, adjust accordingly, and it's important to consult again with a healthcare professional before making some significant health changes. So talking about future directions as well. So there's a lot of hormetic interventions that are being researched right now. Senolytics target senescent cells, and NAD plus boosters support cellular energy. And there's some theories about how they might have synergetic effects on health span and lifespan. There's a lot of research questions that I'm curious about. For example, investigating the molecular mechanisms of hormesis across different tissues and organ systems, exploring the long-term effects of hormetic interventions on aging and the progression of age-related diseases, Studying individual variability. Oh, this one's tough, but I'm so interested in studying the personalization of hormetic stressors and how can we optimize this. Everybody always asks me for a personalized program, and working one-on-one as a physician, I do have the advantage of being able to do this for my patients, but it's not always obvious, and it can take a long time to understand a person, where they're coming from, and following them through some time to best understand how to adjust a hormetic program. But that's what we do when we create certain dietary programs or certain exercise programs. We're really just adjusting according to a person's individual responses. So to summarize today's key points, Hormesis is a dose-dependent adaptive response where low levels of stressors induce beneficial effects, enhancing resilience and health. Remember, what doesn't kill you can make you stronger, but also remember that a certain dose, the dose is the poison, so a certain dose can actually kill you, so to be careful. Molecular mechanisms involve the activation of pathways such as NRF2, leading to increased production of antioxidant proteins and cytoprotective enzymes. There's so many benefits, and they include improved cellular repair, metabolic efficiency, neuroprotection, and increased resistance to various stressors. Some practical applications that you can take home even now are to incorporate exercise, dietary phytochemicals, intermittent fasting, thermal stress like sauna or cold plunges, and cognitive challenges to harness the benefits of hormesis. Aging and longevity is a field that can benefit so much from hormesis. So hormesis can counteract the age-related decline, promoting healthy aging and potentially extending lifespan. It's essential to approach hormesis thoughtfully, considering individual differences and potential risks, and to seek professional guidance when necessary. Thank you so much for joining me today on today's episode of The Longevity Show. Hormesis offers such a fascinating perspective on how we can activate our body's health by embracing controlled mild stressors. By activating our body's innate defense mechanisms, we can improve resilience, delay the onset of age-related diseases, and potentially extend our lifespan. So I encourage everybody to take away this lesson about hormesis and just consider how hormesis might fit into your wellness journey. Remember, it's about finding the right balance and personalizing your approach to suit your individual needs and circumstances.